Hey, hello friends. In this video, I'm trying to implement clearAllTimeouts function, and this question is asked at Facebook, and this is posted by Sagar Giri in LinkedIn. So thanks Sagar for sharing this question with us. So now I'll try to explain whatever I have done till now, and then we can try to implement the clearAllTimeouts method. So I have added three buttons. So on click of this button, this function is getting executed. Inside I have set timeout. After 2 seconds delay, 1 will get consoled, and also after 4 seconds, 2 will get consoled. And when clicking on this timer, it's going to clear the timer. Right, so we know set timeout is going to start a timer. After few seconds, we can execute this callback function. And if you don't want that timer to execute anymore, we can clear that by passing the timer ID. So where do we get the timer ID? So the set timeout method is going to return timer ID. So this we can pass inside this clear timeout to clear the timer. Okay. So I have created a global variable timer1 and timer2 so that I can store the timer and access it inside another function. Okay. Now the task is to implement clear all timer. So when I click on this button, after 2 seconds, 1 is getting consoled, and before 2 gets consoled, I'm just clicking on this clear timer. So 2 is not getting consoled here, right? And same way, if I start the timer and then again, and if I click on this clear all timer button, it should clear all the timers and it should not execute this 2 anymore, right? So it is throwing me error because I've not yet implemented this clear all timeouts method. So first I'll try to implement this. So on this window object, I'm going to implement clear all timeouts, and it's going to be a function, right? So I'm going to console not yet implemented. Okay. Now when I click on this, instead of getting error, I'll get some console. So next what we are going to do is we have to collect this ID somehow, right? So if we have to call this clear timeout, we can actually, if we have all the IDs inside some array or something, so timer1 or timer2, right? So we can just go through this using for each, and then we get the ID and then clear timeout, and then we can pass the ID over here, right? So this is what going to be the implementation of clear all timeouts. But the trick is how we are going to get these IDs, right? So every time when we need to add new set timeout, we have to create a new variable, set timeout 3, and then we have to store it inside the array, right? Array dot push, and then we have to pass the timer 3, right? So this is not actual implementation, but just for understanding, I'm just trying to type something. So we have an array and we have to push timer 1, 2, 3 inside the same array, and we have to execute something like this, right? So this is little tedious because we have to create a variable or we have to push this timer inside the array, right? Every time we cannot keep adding new things, right? To make better developer experience, we have to override this set timeout, okay, so that we will get the ID somehow and we can store it in some variable, so we can push it inside some array or something like that. Okay, so how we are going to do it now? So first I'll override this set timeout. Okay, I'm just going to do window dot set timeout equal to new empty function. Okay, so it is going to take two arguments. One is the callback function, right? So I'll put it here, cv, and also second argument is the delay, right? So this delay, and now if I console callback and delay, is going to console the callback function and the timer delay and the delay, but it is not going to execute the timer after few seconds because we are overriding the actual implementation. But we need the actual implementation. We cannot do it on our own because it is handling a lot of browser APIs and internals, right? So we cannot implement that by our own. So instead what I'm going to do is, before overriding this function, I want to take a backup. window dot underscore set timeout. So this is a variable. I'm just going to keep the function as backup. Okay, I'm going to store the actual implementation. So I'm not going to execute this. Instead, I'm just passing this a reference. So this function is now copied here, right? So the reference is stored here. And now what we can do is inside the set timeout, we can actually call the window dot underscore set timeout, and we can pass this callback and delay, right? I should remove this A. So when I have this, now when I click on this button, it is going to console 1 and then 2, right? So it is working as expected. So we successfully implemented this set timeout, right? So we have our own implementation set timeout now. We need IDs now, right? So when clicking on this clear timeout, we have to clear these IDs, but before that we have to return something here so that we can store these IDs. And in our implementation, we are not returning anything. So whatever set timeout is going to return, I'm going to store it in a variable, and I'm going to return that variable, which is the ID, right? Now if I start this, it is going to console 1, and then if I clear, it is not going to console 2. So now we have this ID. So before returning, what we can do, we can push inside an array, and we can use that same array to clear all timeouts, right? So what I'll do, I'll just create window dot underscore underscore IDs, go to empty array, right? So I'm going to add new property in the global object, and also I'm going to push the ID. Okay, and now what we can do here, we can actually loop through these IDs. The for each will get the ID and then clear timeout the ID. And after completing this, we will be having some IDs inside this array, so we can clear that out. So now when I start this timer, it's going to console 1, and then I can clear all. It's not going to console 2. Okay, so we have implemented uh, the clear all timeouts method, but here is one problem. We are polluting the global object too much, right? So we are trying to add window dot underscore underscore IDs, window dot underscore set timeout, right? So instead, we don't want to instead of polluting the global object, how we can avoid that, right? So we have to think about that. So for that, we can use closures. So when closure will get created, as we all know, when a function is inside another function, then closure will create it, right? So we have this function, so we want to closure some value to this, so we need this function to be inside another function. So I'm going to wrap this with another function. Okay. And this is the function, right? Now we have a function, and inside we have another function. So we have to execute this function, so we can directly execute by using this ify expression. So it will immediately invoke the function, right? And here instead of window.ids, what I'll do is I'll move it to the top and I'll make it const ids. Okay, here we are overriding ids equal to empty array, so instead of that I can make it let, right? Instead of const we can make it let, so that we can reassign the value. And wherever we have underscore ids, instead of accessing it from window dot underscore ids, we are now accessing this variable, which is closure, right? And same way, instead of polluting this, I'll just move it up and I'll name it const underscore set timeout, and instead of accessing window dot set timeout, we can directly access this value. So now this is closure with this function, right? And now let me try to execute this. Clear all. Yeah, it is working as expected. But here is one problem. uh, we have this underscore IDs, right? So we are adding something to this underscore ID, but we are actually not removing if we don't call this function. So when this function is getting called, we are just resetting these IDs. But in case if this function is not getting called, then unwanted IDs will be keep added to this array, right? So to avoid that, what we can do is we can implement our own clear timeout. So when we implement this, we can clear the timeout as well as remove that from the ID. Okay. So what we do, take a backup before overriding the actual functionality. So clear timeout is equal to window dot clear timeout. Okay, and we are going to override window dot clear timeout equal to, it is going to take an ID, and inside this we can call underscore clear timeout. We can pass the actual ID, right? So here we are calling the actual function implementation, and this is the one we implemented, right? So after doing this, we can find out IDs dot index of the ID, right? Const ID to, sorry, you get the index, and if index greater than -1, we can splice from the index and 1, right? Now we are not going to store any unwanted IDs inside this underscore IDs. And one more thing we can do is, instead of having this array, we can implement set, right? So that we won't be storing repeated values, and yeah, so we can reduce these logics little bit. Okay, so hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.